The average life expectancy of a male in the US is 78. So I got 28 years left, and I've got 28 summers left, focused on the journey rather than the destination. That's probably the most profound change that I've experienced. I think we're all guilty of, certainly I've been guilty of this in my life, but you kind of go through your life and you say, okay, I'll do this when. I'll slow down when I get the promotion, or when we sell the business, or we'll go on that holiday when this happens. You're trading out happiness for a future that may never happen. And the way that I overcame my trauma was by connecting with nature.
Carl Jung says, the greatest burden that a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent.
I probably loved few and trusted many. And actually, I think probably where I am in my life now, it's about love many and trust few. I say this to my kids all the time when they get upset, but I never get upset by somebody's words whose advice you wouldn't seek. Somebody that I idolized and thought was a really wonderful professional. And in his autobiography, he talked about trying to live his life as if there was a film crew following him all day, every day. Because sometimes we get so stuck in autopilot, we stop looking, or we stop being aware.
First of all, Jay, thanks for being here.
Hey, Mike, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
I'm curious, and this is a very personally driven question. As you entered and as you navigate midlife, what changes to your perspective have you gone through?
I feel like the first part of my life just went by like a blur, right? And so I always feel like the first part of my life was just the fast lane. I was just in a hurry to get everywhere. I was in a hurry to, achieve things, be successful with work, travel the world, meet people. And I think it probably was a bit of a lack of intention and focus on being present. I think I often was living my life a little bit in the future. Not intentionally, but just kind of finding that I was always chasing something. And I think the analogy I always like to use, which is probably a little cliched, but I kind of like it, is like when you're on the fast lane of the motorway, and you're just going so fast that everything's just going by like a blur. And you get to your destination a little bit quicker, but you've just missed all those rich opportunities to kind of enjoy the view and enjoy the journey and enjoy the process rather than the outcome or the destination. And as I've got to middle age, and as I reflect on the second half of my life and rapidly approaching 50, I'm much more intentional, and I'm much more focused on the journey rather than the destination. I think that's probably the most profound change that I've experienced in middle age. I think is this idea that it's not really about the destination at all. It's about every part of the journey on the way, and enjoying those moments, slowing down, getting in the slow lane and watching the scenery, seeing the world go by, making connections and all of the, the beautiful moments that are there that in the first half of your life, I think you're in such a hurry, you tend to miss them.
That's so interesting, because I'll tell you, I'm curious to get your reactions to this, but I think one of the things that's been happening for me is it goes back to where you started, which is my entire perspective on time has completely changed. The notion of how much time I actually have feels so much shorter, so much more compressed than it was before. That for me, maybe there's been a little bit of it's getting me to lean forward and go a little faster, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I think more so it's like if I were to make a decision, for example, on, I'm just going to do this for a couple of years, like career-wise, for example, that's actually like a long time relative to the amount of time I have. So it's changed that. It's like, I actually only have this little bit left and I need to use it really, really well. I'm curious, like, have you had that as well?
Yeah.
Or?
One of the most powerful experiences that you can have is this realization that time is limited. I love to read the Stoics' work, and in Stoicism they say memento mori, right? This idea that remember you're dying, and I think for some people it seems really bleak, but actually it's a powerful reminder that time is limited. And actually, you and I are coming up on knowing each other for nearly a decade now, and early on in our relationship, I sent you a link to a podcast, an interview between Tom Bilyeu and Jesse Itzler. And you'll remember that halfway through, Tom asked Jesse, hey, why have you got such an unbelievable kind of energy? You've made loads of money, you've built and sold a business, you've been successful, most people are slowing down at your age. How come you're starting to accelerate and do more and really focusing on, filling your life with experiences. And his answer, I think, stopped us both in our tracks, which was, well, I'm 50, and the average life expectancy of a male in the US is 78. So I got 28 years left. And then he said, well, actually, it's worse than that. I've got 28 summers left. And this idea just lodged in my brain that if we start to measure our life by how many summers we have, we're both parents. So my oldest daughter is nearly 19. She doesn't really take summer holidays with us anymore. So, my second oldest daughter is 15. So maybe I've got 3 with her. That kind of sharpens the mind. You look at your child and you say, oh, they're 15, I've still got loads of holidays left, but maybe I've only got 3 summer holidays with Grace. That really sharpens the mind and makes you be really present. I absolutely buy into that concept of time being limited. It really makes you focus on how do you want to spend your time. And I think we're all guilty of, certainly I've been guilty of this in my life, but you kind of go through your life and you say, okay, I'll do this when. So I'll slow down when I get the promotion, or when we sell the business, or we'll go on that holiday when this happens. And the problem is you're trading out happiness for a future that may never happen. And I think that's, it's a really dangerous place to be. And so many of us fall into that trap. It's like this kind of hamster wheel of, okay, well, I haven't got time to be happy and content and fulfilled now, but I'll do that in the future. But unfortunately, you get to our age, and a lot of friends and family start to get unwell, and you start to realize how fragile life is. And I've had a few friends in the last couple of years that are my age who've got really sick, and some haven't made it, and you suddenly remember that the when may never happen. And so I think that's definitely made me want to live my life now and be really focused and really intentional on what is happening right now, and not live too far in the future.
That importance of making sure that you're making your time count, and that reassessment of what's actually important to you and your values and so forth, it's really creates a pretty visceral internal pressure and change that you can't ignore, that you can't just push away. Or actually, if you do ignore and push away, I think that's where the crisis ends up coming in, is because you're still trying to live according to the old ways of being and not the new ways.
This idea that life is limited is so, it's so powerful and motivating, but it's also frightening at the same time, right? And you've probably seen those charts where there's like circles on a page for every week that you might have in your life. And if you were to actually fill those out now for me at my age, I'd probably, with the average life expectancy of a male in the UK, I'm probably more than halfway. That's pretty motivating to see all of those boxes or all of those circles all filled up. I think this notion of being really present and enjoying the life that you have right now is a powerful motivator. I love the fact that you call it a midlife transition. I hate it when people call it a midlife crisis, because I think a midlife crisis almost in somehow suggests that it's wrong, or that it's some kind of illness or trauma. But actually, I think it's an awakening. I wish I knew at 20 what I know at 48 in terms of about what really matters in life. And it's not status or titles or money or houses or cars or watches. It's, despite what most Instagram influencers would want us to believe, it's none of those things. It genuinely isn't, at least not in my mind anyway. And so for me, it was an awakening. And it actually came on the back of quite a lot of trauma, as you know, because we've talked about that before. But the suffering was really a powerful part of the process for me, to help me kind of be awakened, reconnect with myself, reconnect with nature, which has been an important part of my journey.
In case you've intrigued anyone, do you want to say anything about the suffering-induced awakening, or does it feel like you've said what you needed to say on that?
Well, I think every year that goes by, I think I can be more crisp and concise with the experience, and that's probably true of any kind of traumatic experience that somebody goes through, which is when it's raw, it's hard to talk about, it's emotional, and the further away you get from it, the more you've processed it and compartmentalized it and understood it and recognized the value that it can bring. And early on, I had a tremendous amount of guilt with my trauma and depression, because I felt like I didn't have any right to feel that way because I was a super privileged person with, you know, fairly privileged background. Um, but actually, you realize as the further you get away from that, it doesn't really matter. We're all people. We've all got, you know, a couple of kidneys, a liver, a couple of lungs, a heart. We've all got a brain. We're all human. It doesn't matter where we come from. Some of us are more fortunate, and some of us are less fortunate. But we all have emotions and feelings. And so, you know, for me, it was just something happened in my career that I wasn't ready for, and all of the experiences I subsequently had, I now, from my master's studies, kind of appreciate as symptomatic of PTSD. But we don't talk about PTSD with work. We talk about it with military and first responders and people that have been in accidents, but we never talk about it with executives and other and people in the workforce. And the way that I overcame my trauma was by connecting with nature. Was just going back to the woods, to the forest, to Mother Nature, and I went pretty deep with it. And you know, it was probably one of the most transformational experiences I've ever been through. I'm wondering what you believe at this stage in your life, what the true source and nature of fulfillment is. You know, is it external achievements? Is it internal peace? Something else entirely? And maybe how that's changed for you in your life and in your journey?
Deep question. And I think I will preface by saying that it has changed for me, and I do have a point of view now. And I recognize that that point of view may continue to evolve and shift. So I don't think that I necessarily have the answer, even for myself, that I have the answer. My first awakening experience was very much a spiritual awakening experience, and it was completely life changing, flipped everything upside down, and I would say aligns most with more of like a Eastern philosophical or Eastern spiritual kind of view, which was who I took myself to be is not actually who I am, and the the actual cause of any negativity and suffering and so forth in life has to do with my relationship to it, whether that's having expectations, demands, desires on things to be other than they are. And so the more that you're present, the more that you are at one with whatever's happening right now, literally this instant, the more at peace you are. And that fulfillment is actually just inherent in your natural state. And that was a huge moment for me. And it completely repatterned my life from that point forward. Now, what's changed for me is I've been on this journey ever since that. So that experience happened in my late 20s, something along that. And I was sort of grappling with and integrating it ever since then. But what's new for me is more of a recognition that there's this other side of what does it mean to be true to yourself? What does it mean to be your true self? When you get out of the way and these natural impulses, true impulses from within are allowed to kind of flow forth through you. If you try to live your life in a way that doesn't honor those things, you create all this friction and this lack of fulfillment. And it creates all kinds of issues in your life. And so very, very practically speaking, that may be that you have some really important, deep seated need to do something in your life. Maybe you're called to do a certain thing, whatever that may be. If you don't do that, then that decision not to do that, to override that, is going to be the source of the exact opposite of fulfillment. And no amount of conscious overriding, even if that thing that you know you need to do is super inconvenient, if it runs counter to the life that you've built in some really significant ways, you need to honor that impulse. Otherwise, you are not going to find that fulfillment. And so those two halves of what does it mean to live true to yourself, that to me is the path to fulfillment.
Well, wait, hold on. Before I say me, I want to dig into that some,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think that's like really powerful, right? And I'm curious to know your journey of kind of figuring out who is your true self and how that has bumped up against maybe societal expectations and leadership expectations in your work. without talking about specific roles, have you felt that friction between those, and how do you navigate that? How, or maybe even better, what advice would you give to somebody listening who is trying to go through that journey of self-discovery to identify who their true self is, and how do they show up day to day with those kind of obvious friction points?
Well, so I'll say I not only have I felt that friction, I feel it still, and that's a big part of my
Hmm.
path right now is navigating that and continuing to shed the beliefs that make me think that I need to be a certain way or that I need to adopt a certain life that isn't necessarily true to that self. So if I go back to whether it's advice for somebody else or I'll share my own personal answer to this. I don't think it's necessarily fully generalizable advice to other people because I do think there's an aspect of you need to find the kind of inner work that aligns with you. But I think broadly speaking, it's inner work. And what I mean by inner work is there is a process of self reflection, self awareness, trial and error, getting out into life, getting the bumps and the bruises, but then looking inward, that is the essential element that's going to allow you to be able to see. But that is not necessarily easy to do. And so, how do you actually get at these really deep rooted core truths for yourself? My practice has involved a ton of different things, whether that's certainly meditation, journaling, those kinds of things. And those have continued to be a key practice. I've had experiences with more like plant medicine work has been an aspect of it, and working with different guides, spiritual guides and therapists, so that's been big. I've more recently discovered the power of dream work, so looking at your dreams as the source of sort of, they tell you symbolically different things that you need to see that are kind of operating below your conscious awareness. Interestingly, and it's something that I want to share more about because I've kind of found a way to do that that has been extremely fruitful for me more recently. So all of those things are like ways to try to get at really core truths that are inherently, they're there, they're always there. They're there for anybody listening to this right now, but you don't always have access to them. And so you have to find what's going to settle you, quiet you, allow those things to come up to the surface in order to be able to recognize them, and then in order to be able to start to figure out what does it mean to act on them in your life.
I find it fascinating to reflect on the reality that most people go through this journey of kind of self-discovery and trying to identify their true self and living with authenticity, and all of those kind of milestones that we've been talking about so far. We tend to do that in the middle of our lives, right? We get to a certain point and you kind of, it's this watershed moment where you look back on where you've been and forward to where you're going, and you have all of this knowledge and experience. We're still not yet as a species recognizing that we should actually be educating our younger generations to do that earlier in their life, right? I'm a father of five, as you know, and I try and do it with my kids. My wife tries to do it with our kids, but from a schooling perspective, they're still coming home with homework, doing Pythagoras, and I can't help, and physics and chemistry, and I know these things are important and people need to learn them, but I can't help feeling that we're not empowering our children to leave education and before they're kind of jettisoned into adult life with some life skills around understanding who you are, particularly as you go through kind of high school, secondary school here in the UK and high school in the US, kind of constantly trying to keep up with other people, right? So I think a lot of your beliefs get skewed and they get muddied and they get muddled and they get lost because you're just trying to fit in and you don't want to be, more often than not, the kid that stands out. And I think we could do a lot worse than actually educating young people to know how to kind of do this inward work so that they're better prepared for life's ups and downs.
I will add on that something that has become really clear to me just as a parent. And it goes back to Carl Jung. Carl Jung says the greatest burden that a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. It's not just about modeling it. If you're actually not living your own truth, doing your own work and gradually becoming more and more your true self, then that's actually leaving an imprint on your kids. This is a poem that I came across recently that I thought was just amazing. It's Rilke. He says, "Sometimes a man stands up during supper and walks outdoors and keeps walking because of a church that stands somewhere in the east, and his children say blessings on him as if he were dead. Other times he remains inside his own house, stays there, inside the dishes and the glasses, so that his children have to go far out into the world toward that same church which he forgot." Just think that sums it up like amazingly. Like you need to do it for yourself, but then also you need to show your own children that as well by how you live your life, not living from fear and so forth.
Yeah, and maybe even beyond that, again, as in terms of humanity, we're not just our children, even for those people that don't have children, our friends and our family and all the people around us, we have an obligation and a responsibility to kind of model behavior for each other, right? When I talked about going back to nature, one of the things that really shocked me when I started to go deep in that world was, how connected we all are, how connected everything is in nature, and actually how as humans we've come to kind of view ourselves as separate from nature. We talk about nature as this other thing that we are not, but we are. We're all part of it. And actually, when you start to realize that, you kind of have this epiphany that we're all just connected. We're all made up of the same matter. Humans, plants, flora, fauna, the whole nine yards are all made of the same stuff. I think probably fulfillment, Mike, it's actually about love. And this idea that probably early on in my life, I probably loved few and trusted many. And actually, I think probably where I am in my life now, it's about love many and trust few. So I have quite a close circle of people that I really trust. I say this to my kids all the time when they get upset, but never get upset by somebody's words whose advice you wouldn't seek, right? Because they get so upset when somebody talks about them or says something bad about them. I'm like, okay, but would you phone that person if you needed advice in your life? And if the answer is no, forget it. So this idea of trusting few, having this kind of counsel, we should all have this kind of council or board of people that we rely on to help us with our big life decisions, but love many. And I was in that kind of love few space for many, many years. I know it sounds a bit hippie maybe to some people listening, but my base position is always one of love. When you lead with love, I think you can feel very fulfilled and very happy.
All right. Is there any aspect of yourself that you feel like you're still hiding from the world, either in full or in part?
I don't think there's much left. Early on, there was a lot. In fact, one of the reasons why I tend to go by Jay now is because I was Jay growing up. My friends, my family, everybody called me Jay. And then for some reason, when I got into work and I started taking these serious roles, I felt like I had to be like corporate and professional. So I was Jason. And I kind of built this whole persona, and I ended up living this kind of dual life. I had like work Jason and like private life Jay. We moved back from the US, my work came to an end suddenly, and I went through this kind of fairly traumatic experience. When I came back out the other side, I was determined to just be me, just authentically me. The other thing was when I was kind of coming up through the ranks and taking on bigger and bigger jobs, I felt like I needed to look and sound like a CEO. So, for example, I've got a lot of tattoos. I didn't think it was appropriate for a CEO of a billion-dollar division of a public company to have tattoos on display. I'm just showing up authentically as me. And if people don't like my tattoos, that's all good. I just want to be who I am. There's always a piece of us, isn't there, that we're not quite showing to the world. And I don't know whether that will ever go away. Somebody that I idolized and thought was a really wonderful professional. And in his autobiography, he talked about trying to live his life as if there was a film crew following him all day, every day. And that really resonated with me because you can think you're living a very honest and authentic and true life, but then would anything change? Would you do all of the things that you do if there was a film crew following you? But I guess we all have a certain part of ourselves that we don't show to everybody. But I think for me, Mike, that kind of plays into this notion that I shared with you a moment ago of this idea of kind of love many, trust few. I love this idea that there's a really close group that really know the deepest parts of me, because that feels to me that's special, and I know the deepest parts of them, and that's that special deep connection of love. But I try to show up every day and be true to my kind of values, and authentically be me. And I guess probably the final thing I would say on that is that parenthood is one of the things that shines a light on that the most, I think. So, I've been a father now for 19 years, and I've got 5 children. My youngest daughter is 3. And at all these ages, they'll constantly, not intentionally, but they shine a light on when you're kind of not living true to your values, and that, the guidance that you give them, and are you doing those things? And I just think that's, it's almost like Mother Nature's way of holding you true to your values, because you find yourself telling your kids to do certain things. If you're a very reflective person who's working on yourself and trying to improve, you then start to realize that maybe you're not living those values as clearly as you thought you were.
I had an image as you were talking about it, and it resonates with me as well when you're talking about almost like concentric circles of trust, or whatever the right word is, of it's not even appropriate for everybody in your life to be in that innermost concentric circle, because it doesn't
Right.
gel with, it's not even necessarily the kindest or highest value thing for certain people in your life. It's not appropriate for certain roles that you're in. And so, but
Mm-hmm.
the question then would be, is anything that's happening in some of those outer concentric circles incongruent with what's happening in the inner circle? That's the things that then need to be addressed.
Right.
How much more can I drop and shed and become that much more authentic and unguarded and open? I'm sure I have a ways to go, but at the same time, I'm certainly come a ways.
For me as well, Mike, one of the things that I tried to adjust in my life is, those times when somebody says something to you and you let it go because it feels good. So somebody might say to you like, "Oh, Mike, you have it together. Like, you're so switched on, you're so dialed in, you're so organized," or whatever they might give you a compliment, and it feels good, right? To hear that. But if it's not true, there's power in just being honest. And when you're younger, you kind of, people be, "Oh, you're a machine, you're so hard working," you're like, and you just go with it because it sounds great. But it's actually so much more powerful to go, no, don't be deceived. Like, I'm like a duck, it looks serene but it's like I'm panicking, I'm struggling, I'm getting it wrong all the time. Because I think we, particularly with social media, I feel a bit like, societally it's become acceptable to just pretend you're perfect. And so I think that's one of the adjustments that we can all make to maybe to show our true self to the world. All of our true self to the world is to be really honest. I know I keep saying this, but parenthood is another perfect example of that. Your kids think you're an absolute hero. And so it's easy to go along with that because it feels good, and you want your kids to look up to you and you want them to respect you. But does that actually serve them well when they land in life as an adult and they have all of these unrealistic expectations of what you were as a person and what you really are? I coach my son's rugby team, and some of the guys I coach with are like big guys, and my youngest daughter Elizabeth would be like, "Oh, my dad could beat up your dad in a fight," and it's like they do, but that's that kind of beautiful innocence of young childhood. But do we let that eke on for too long? I wouldn't say which one because I wouldn't want to share her story on her behalf, but one of my children has had some struggles with mental health. I remember having a conversation with her where she was like, "Well, you wouldn't understand because, you've never had to deal with this." I'm like, "Oh, I'm giving off this vibe that I've got it all together." But, and this was a few years back, but I hadn't. And so, and then sharing that creates this vulnerability and this connection, and then this realization that we all struggle. So we all want the world and people around us to think we're great because we want to be accepted, we want to be loved. But actually, I think it's showing your kind of true self, good and bad. I'm just curious to know, to what extent do you feel like your personal journey is interconnected with other people's. And the reason I ask the question is, in recent years, my network has changed, and I've become connected with people who've really inspired me and motivated me. And I'm just curious to know whether that's true for you, and if so, has it changed the way that you approach new relationships or seek out new connections?
What I think is, I don't think that anybody that we meet is by accident. It really feels to me like that interconnectivity of journeys, the level of synchronicities that I've experienced, and especially in the last 5, 7 years of my life, have been so unmistakable that I 100% think that like this is like one tapestry, and we are all on our own individual kind of soul's journey, but simultaneously it's very much connected with other people's. And that's how it feels to me. And actually, it's whether or not I don't even need to hold to a belief as though, oh, this is for sure true. It's there's certain beliefs that are just useful. They feel good. The more that I've seen that and looked through my life through that lens, the more magical it's felt, the more I've enjoyed it. I'm curious. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel the same way. I do think, reconnecting with nature kind of plugged me back into the recognition that everything is connected on Earth, and in this kind of ecosystem. It's just one circular journey, right, of matter that becomes certain things and then gets recycled and becomes other things. And I think that must, I don't understand it. I certainly don't profess to understand it, and I don't feel like I need to. I just feel like there is this interconnectedness between people, and I think you can live your life open or closed to that. And if you're closed to it, I think you'll just miss stuff. And I feel like for a large part of my life, I was closed to it, so I just missed stuff. Nature will present opportunity, the universe will present opportunities to you. This idea that it's kind of repeating patterns. If you're aware and you're watching, then I think there are these wonderful opportunities. Most people have experienced this moment where they meet somebody where they felt like they've always known them, whether that's like a significant other who's a love interest, or whether it's just a friend or a work colleague, but you meet somebody, oh my God, I feel like I've always known them. And you almost can't remember a time when you didn't have them in your life, but they might only have been in it for a few months. And for me, that's that connection. And just, you've got to be open for it. And if you're open for it, I just think amazing things can happen. I wanted to say yes to everything, right? And I was just like, oh, I've just got to say yes to everything. But then I just became overloaded. So I don't think it's the same as saying yes to everything. I don't think it's the same as, just embracing every opportunity. I think it's just being aware that these opportunities and these connections are out there, and being open and susceptible to them and not being closed. It's like a skill, isn't it? I think we all have to remind ourselves how to do it, because sometimes we get so stuck in autopilot, we stop looking, or we stop being aware. It's like if I said to you, it's the classic one, isn't it? If I said to you today on your drive to work, count how many red cars you see, you would be able to tell me at the end how many red cars you see. But if I met you at the other end and said, okay, how many yellow cars did you see? You wouldn't be able to tell me, because you weren't looking for yellow cars, you were looking for red cars. And so I think it's just that idea that we've got to be, open to all of the things that may present themselves to us. And so it's almost like, what questions are we asking ourselves?
Yeah, and I just had a situation where I was listening to an interview, and it was a Harvard professor, very well known person, and she was giving examples of kind of these coincidences that would be difficult to think of as coincidence. Like, oh, that is just, there's too much going on there. And this is somebody who's obviously scientifically oriented, but at the same time open to that there might be more going on, and that science can only answer so much. And so she's telling that story, and something in the story triggered in me this intuitive little hit of, oh, actually, I'm curious about what's been going on with this person who is a podcaster who I know, who has not had a home for his podcast, well known podcast, and they've been looking for a home for like a year for their podcast. And I thought I should check. And I checked in that moment, and literally an hour before, they had provided an update on what things were going on. And so it was just one of those reminders for me of it's that connectivity. We know it to be true, we know it to be true in a physics sense. And yet, why then wouldn't that be the case that from a more intuitive or consciousness or whatever else, however else you want to think about it, why wouldn't it be the case there as well? And for me, when those moments happen, I love them because they remind me exactly what you just said, which is slow down, widen the aperture, notice more,
Yeah.
because you're getting
Yeah.
all kinds of signals and you're not often not noticing them because you're too narrow.
Normally, when I look back on my life, I don't know whether this would be true for you, but all of the good things that I've had happen in my life that have really brought me significant joy are normally connected in some way to, me being open to something new. And so, I think that's for me is enough. That's enough proof. That's all I need. I don't need a bunch of science or a bunch of data. I'm happy with that kind of napkin maths of, well, the numbers seem to speak for themselves. Good things seem to happen when I'm more susceptible to those connections. And I love this idea that people could meet. You could meet somebody tomorrow at, whatever you are, mid 40s or whatever, who could change your life, to fundamentally change your life, could take you on a path that you'd never expected, professionally or personally or whatever that may be. And that's just a remarkable thing to think about, isn't it? It's just, in my mind anyway, it's just crazy to think that there could be another human being out there. You could, perhaps you'll be the co-founder of some big company that, might be worth billions of dollars one day. And there could be a co-founder out there that there's just this other human being walking around right now that one day you might look back and go, my God, we've just spent the last 15 years building this incredible company or doing this amazing thing, and you've never met them yet. And the only thing between that future and it not happening is whether you're open to meeting that person and hearing what they've got to say. I think that's kind of special.
I want to share this story. I had a experience with a spiritual guide that was it was one of these like broke me open, and I saw some very important things, and the guidance that I got in that moment was, do not do anything, don't make any major life changes, just sit and wait for 63 days. Literally, that's what this person said. Wait for 63 days. I thought, okay, that's oddly specific, but okay, I will wait for 63 days. So I put a little calendar reminder into my phone, day 63, and then I forgot about it. Went on living my life, didn't make any major life changes, doing work, family, the usual. And then day 63 rolls around, and I wake up that morning and I have a calendar notification that it's day 63. And so I go into that day already primed, thinking to myself, I wonder what's going to happen today. And just like pause for a minute and imagine the orientation of entering a day being like, absolute magic could happen today. I wonder what's going to happen today. And that was how I entered the day. And I went through the day. This happened to be right prior to when I was going to be launching my audiobook, Spiritual Wayfinders. I got a text that day from one of the people in the book who had connected me with somebody who essentially has a big audience and following and so forth, and basically said, I listened to this chapter, I loved it, I want to help, or I'm willing to help. And it just blew my mind. And the point of that is not actually the outcome or the fact that, what actually happened. The point of that, and the reason why I felt I wanted to share that, was it was so instructive to me to see that just my approach to that day was one of exactly what you said, wide open. What could happen? Like anything could happen today. And that is just a magical way to go through life.
It is, right? And it's almost like in that moment, a new mantra is born. Like every day is day 63, right? Every day is day 63. It can be if you go into it with that intention and that belief that it's not going to be an autopilot day, but today is day 63. Why not? Anything can
Right.
happen.